Hi there, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be having a great conversation on increasing the LabVIEW advantage with other NI software. I'm David Prida, a solutions marketer here at NI, and I'm joined by some of our LabVIEW champions, Mark Ridgely, Sam Roundy, and Chris Roebuck. Could you all introduce yourselves? Let's start with Mark.
Yes, thanks for having me here today. My name is Mark Ridgely. I'm the founder of Radius Technologies LLC, and we offer subscription-based NI consulting that enables customers to get help when they need it at an affordable, predictable monthly cost. We also offer high-quality instructor-led training on NI software and hardware products.
Sam?
Yeah, I've been using LabVIEW since LabVIEW 5, so about 20 something years. And I'm one of the founders of TestStand. We offer automated test frameworks and automated test solutions. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Chris Roebuck. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Conrad Technologies based in the UK. We are an alliance partner of over 30 years standing, and we specialize in automated test and production solutions for a variety of different markets, primarily automotive.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for joining us. We're all glad to have you. So I think to kick off this conversation, what are some of the reasons that you love LabVIEW? Sam, I think you said you were using LabVIEW for a pretty long time. So what has made you really love LabVIEW?
So LabVIEW is fun because it's a different way to think about programming. It's easy to get going. It's a unique way to look at code, like I said. And it's great for multi-threading and for instrument control, which is where I think its bread and butter is. And there's just a great community around LabVIEW, a lot of support at NI, and it's just fun being a part of that community. So that's why I love it.
Yeah. Do you have any like favorite projects or anything that you've really been proud of, sir, over the years?
Yeah, we've made a hardware abstraction layer in LabVIEW that is very powerful, and we've gotten a lot of traction with it. We also have a user interface that I've been a big part of making that we call Task. That's built on Actor Framework and is very plug and play. I've had one project that I don't know if I'm proud of, but it was an interesting one to make. I made a actual TestStand editor that didn't require a TestStand license in LabVIEW. So that was an interesting one. I had to scrap it because it's too hard to maintain, but it was fun too.
Nice. Chris or Mark, do you have any
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to just back up what just Sam said, it is fun. LabVIEW was my first programming language as an undergraduate physicist. I'd never programmed before, and I was provided with some instruments and basically told, "Hey, go make this LabVIEW thing. Do something with those instruments." And I thought to myself, I've never programmed before. But actually, very quickly, I was able to control the instruments. I was able to acquire some data and present that data in a meaningful way to me as a physicist. Now, when I find myself programming in other languages, actually, I often find myself almost slipping into a mental model of how would I solve this problem in LabVIEW, and then translating that problem to Python or C#.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, one of the most helpful things about LabVIEW is there's always sort of a flow, and it kind of helps you along the way. I work in marketing. I'm in LabVIEW sometimes, but not all the time. So when I do have to go back in, it's pretty easy to kind of follow things and go back into it, right? Which I think is one of the things that you mentioned. So yeah.
And the reason I like LabVIEW is because of its main selling point, the graphical programming paradigm that lets engineers program the way they think, right, graphically. And I remember years ago, and I had a couple of different advertising campaigns. One that said, "You live in a graphical world, why not program in one?" And then they had another one that just simply stated, "It's okay to have fun." And that's something that was mentioned by both Sam and Chris. And LabVIEW is fun to use, and those two ads have resonated since the first time I heard them, and they still resonate today.
100%. Yeah, one of my coworkers actually sent me an image of, you know, a sign or something, and it was saying how we live in a graphical world and how LabVIEW makes sense. So that makes sense why they would send that to me.
Yeah,
Awesome, awesome.
just talking about the fun aspect and the graphical aspect. I was thinking the other day about how we debug, and it's so enlightening to be able to actually see the flow of data, see the order of operations on a block diagram. When I find myself in a textual programming language and I'm trying to debug, it's a very different paradigm. And LabVIEW just kind of makes sense. I can see how the code is executing, what values are being returned from the various primitives on the block diagram. And it's actually fun to debug too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It is nice, as you're saying, to see it go through and see exactly where, you know, that error hits and then what happens once you get there, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any other favorite projects, Chris, that you want to mention, similar to Sam, how he was saying, something that you're proud of over the years?
Yeah, well, so I've been programming in LabVIEW for, I guess now 27, 28 years. I've got some projects that I'm absolutely not proud of, I can say, probably some of the early ones that I worked on. I wouldn't like to go back and do a code review of those, but we can talk about that later. In terms of proud projects, I worked as part of a multinational team at Conrad a couple of years ago. I worked with fellow LabVIEW champion Becky Linton and some of my colleagues at Conrad across different geographies on a automotive data logging solution in vehicle. And that was extremely high throughput with a lot of complex interfaces. And it all came together really nicely. We were working in different geographies, very different time zones. And we spent nearly 20, I guess, yeah, 10, 20 man years developing a solution. And in the end, it all came together really nicely. It exceeded the customer expectation, which is always fantastic. I won't claim it was easy, but we really enjoyed working on the project together and we had a fantastic outcome.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Not to bring up maybe potentially a sore spot, Chris, but kind of where I was thinking of going to next was thinking about, you know, what are some of the things that maybe LabVIEW isn't ideal for? What are some of potentially some of the least favorite projects where maybe you spent a little too much time spinning your wheels on something?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I've lost count of early in my career the number of times I ended up refactoring code to create sub VIs because it's very easy to kind of just throw down code onto the block diagram and not stop yourself to think about the modularity. And modularity is something that LabVIEW does really well, but as an inexperienced developer, it's also exceptionally fast to be able to just throw down structures, run some wires, and get that immediate feedback on the code that you've just written. Sometimes you've got to kind of restrain yourself and actually start to think about, is this piece of code I'm going to do, is it going to be reusable? Do I need to create a sub VI? How can I test it in isolation? Those are things that as a relative novice to LabVIEW, I didn't appreciate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny, I was looking at the NI Connect schedule, and one of the sessions that we're talking about is one of the sessions on the schedule is test planning. And one of the descriptions is, you know, we don't often want to plan, we want to engineer. So diving into the code and, you know, not necessarily thinking about modularity and planning and how you're going to structure all of it isn't necessarily an enticing thing to do. You kind of just want to go in and build it and kind of get it done. But planning and getting ready for your task is definitely super important. So agreed. Sam, Mark, do y'all have anything to add to that? Maybe not on that topic, but any projects that you maybe want to redo or look at some different tool or something to do rather than just doing it directly in LabVIEW?
Yeah, I think LabVIEW isn't great at like web or backend type applications, especially even with dashboarding. I've seen a lot of, and I've been a part of putting together dashboards for databases or data lakes. and it's it's not the best tool out there, not gonna lie. It's definitely weak at that, mostly because of the dynamic or the inability to dynamically create UIs and controls and things like that in a runtime environment. It's not, I see where I see a lot of people abusing LabVIEW is they're trying to make their own test executives in LabVIEW. There's off-the-shelf tools, and I'm sure we'll get to that later in the conversation, that are part of the LabVIEW Plus, studio, but there's other tools out there that are much better for doing those kinds of things. So that's where I see it either being abused or where it's weak.
Yeah, and I would build off of what you guys have said. As an instructor, I teach a lot of courses for NI, and I see what Chris described is the code and fix mentality or development mode, where you just get a lot of code down and then you kind of go back through and fix things as you run into problems. And that's always problematic for customers. And, using the proper tool for the job you're trying to do is definitely important as well. That's the classic build or buy question, right? Because you can build anything with LabVIEW, but sometimes it's better to go with a different product. And one area I see that in a lot is the data analysis portion. A lot of people do customized data analysis routines, and that's a big burden because then you have to maintain that code base, you have to update it, you have to troubleshoot it, release new features. So we need to use the right tool for the job. And sometimes that tool is not LabVIEW.
Yeah, definitely. I think finding something that fits your need. I think sometimes, if you build it yourself, you're like, well, I'm not paying for something, so it's free in a way, but in a way you're spending a lot of time and you don't maybe necessarily factor in or plan for all this maintenance and everything that's really going to come up. So for sure. Sam, so you mentioned, building your own test executive, or you see customers who try building their own test executive. So sort of bridging to that, I guess, when do you see those sort of things come up? And how do you see customers, spend their time doing that? Or
I see it all the time because I deal with a lot of customers. I think like Mark was saying, we're LabVIEW engineers and we can do anything with this tool. Everything's a nail when you have a hammer, right? And I think a lot of times we don't stop to look at what other options are out there. For example, I have probably 10 presentations on why you should never write your own test executive and why you should just use TestStand. I'm a big advocate of TestStand. I'm the highest kudoed author on the TestStand forums. And so I'm kind of biased towards it, of course, but at the same time, it's like every time people try to create their own test executive, they run into one of three issues. The person who is the main or lead architect usually leaves the company and dumps a big code base for everybody else to maintain. The other problem is they run into a technical roadblock, usually around parallelism or multi-threading or multi-dot testing. And then the last one is usually their code base will either become too legacy or too hard to maintain or too hard to keep up to date. And so they usually have to either refactor or move on. And most of them end up adopting a tool like TestStand. So
for you, Sam, so when did you encounter TestStand? And what was it like? Like, assuming you were using LabVIEW before, when did you learn it, and how did that sort of come into one of your tool sets, one of the tools in your tool set?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really fair because I was an application engineer at NI back in the day. So I was supporting TestStand and teaching TestStand to a lot of customers. But when I got out in the commercial world, my first job, I was like, yeah, we need TestStand. And so I brought that in, and it was a huge success on unifying and standardizing the team. So
Yeah, for me, I was working in medical devices, and we adopted TestStand from the first public release. So I've been using it since version 1. And I do see commonly in all the courses I teach, most of the customers have some kind of homebrew test executive that they've written or somebody has written or just made up in their organization. And those things have a lot of gravity. It's hard to get people to move away from that because even though it may not have all the features of TestStand, it's understood by the people working in those teams. And they have made a large investment. Usually it's many years. And the end product that they do end up with doesn't have any of the features that TestStand has. I mean, basically theirs is just a sequencer in many cases. And so, you know, when you try to bring in TestStand, you meet a lot of resistance. Also, if people have already experimented with TestStand, they kind of try to learn it on their own and just kind of make their way through. And that leads them to make poor design decisions that are going to impact their use of TestStand going forward. And because of those poor design decisions, that just drives more people to be anti-TestStand because they say, oh, look what we have. It's hard to work with. It doesn't work the way we think it should. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling thing that they end up usually sticking with their existing test executives.
Yeah, and I would argue that having their own test executive and building your own test executive and the maintenance nightmare that can introduce, it also gives LabVIEW a black eye sometimes because the people look at that and they say, well, LabVIEW's just not good at that. And it's like, well, that's because you're using it for the wrong purpose. And so that really gives LabVIEW a black eye as well, which is not a good thing, right? You got to use the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, definitely agree with the impact on LabVIEW, the negative impact on LabVIEW's perspective. I see that as well. And much of the training I do is that, you know, the people that have implemented these, you know, LabVIEW code bases and test executives honestly haven't had any formal training in LabVIEW or TestStand, right? So they just try to learn everything through watching YouTube videos or doing self-paced kind of reading online or whatever. And, you know, they don't understand the ramifications of the design decisions they make. And then the end user doesn't see any of that. They just see a poor product delivered that they're supposed to use. And again, like you said, Sam, they blame LabVIEW or TestStand, right? So it's a difficult situation, but it's one that can be overcome with some support from people like us to guide these companies in making the right decisions, go in, do demos of, you know, how to properly implement things. And we just have to educate customers on that to change that perception.
What's kind of interesting situation that I've seen is sometimes I'll engage with customers and their immediate feedback is, well, I don't need TestStand because I just need to sequence some tests. TestStand does user management. TestStand produces reports or connects to a database or has an operator interface. I don't need any of that stuff. I just need to sequence some simple tests. And then the next meeting, could we add some user management? I want technicians to be able to do different activities than an engineer. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to log to this SQL database that we've discovered that we have in our production facility. And could we also have some XML reports? So they end up actually adding all of the things that they think they didn't need with TestStand. They end up adding it anyway at some later point in time.
Right.
Yep. Yep. I've definitely heard that before. You know, TestStand is something that's extremely powerful. And you may not think you need something, but when you do need it, you often don't have it. And then you will need it at some point in time. So that makes a lot of sense. I guess Chris or Mark, what was some of your experience as like learning TestStand? What is it like when you introduce it to customers? Like once you finally, you know, show this to people, what is like sort of that learning curve potentially for them, or what was it like for you?
Yeah, I'll answer that first, I guess. For me, I had kind of have a what I'll call an unfair advantage because as a CPI teaching courses all the time, I'm required to stay up on all the NI software products, right? So I have to constantly learn the new things. And the good thing about that is, you know, that I can bring that to students, and also I work as a consultant as well. So I bring that knowledge into the class as well. And it's important for not only for me to learn these tools and stay up to date, but also for the customer as well. As I mentioned earlier, you know, many customers try to use this software without the proper training. And as Chris mentioned, these software packages have so many capabilities that the customer doesn't even know they need or want yet. And if they're going to try to learn that on their own, they're going to have a very steep climb to get proficient. And that's going to be hard for them. So that's one of the things that I'm proud of as an instructor, is being able to help people get up that learning curve a lot quicker by giving them some good, solid in-person training with hands-on experience.
So, like Mark, I'm a CPI also, and one of the things that I notice is almost a moment of realization when I'm teaching the TestStand, the NI TestStand courses, is this realization of the students when they actually really understand what TestStand can offer them. A lot of them, their expectation is, I'm going to sequence some tests. And when they find out about things like multi-DUT testing, multi-threading, the ability to manage shared resources with things like synchronization steps, that there's like a real, wow, I've just opened Pandora's box and there's this huge feature-rich product that I now need to learn how to use. It's quite revealing actually to see the students recognize that and realize what they can customize as well. You can see the hands starting to go up in the room when you cover reporting, for example, and the kind of the mental journey that people are going on when they realize how they can actually modify report content, report layout, and things like that. And not to be dismissive, but actually how accessible some of those features are. I'm going to flip side as well, is I also see, we talked about, maybe what's not so great. One of the things is to kind of get that balance right of where you do the programming. I see a lot of people try to do a lot of what you might call programming in TestStand that should be done in the code modules themselves. So I think understanding where that balance sits is really important too.
Yeah, that's a good point, and a lot of customers miss that point, because again, they don't have the training, they don't have the knowledge, right? And you're not going to learn how to make those decisions just by jumping in and trying to cobble something together yourself. And that's what most people do. They get a license for TestStand and they go and, okay, you need to make a sequence. So they cobble it together with no real idea of how the decisions they're making, which ones are best. Because what I tell students is that there's no one correct way to do anything in TestStand. There are better ways and there are worse ways, and each one of those has trade-offs in how you manage. You're going to have to manage this code in the future, your ability to add new features in the future, how your user experience is going to be, and you have to understand that total picture to be able to make the best decision for how to do anything in TestStand.
And we probably should say, Mark, CPI is Certified Professional Instructor. So I don't know about Sam. Sam, please state if you are. But as a professional instructor, fantastic. So we're in good company. So we are certified professional instructors. So we've been vetted by NI to ensure that we have the knowledge and the teaching skills to educate NI's customers on these tools.
So I think we've talking about LabVIEW and then now TestStand. How do you see, Sam, someone upgrading from something like just LabVIEW to then TestStand, and we talk about needing to sequence a few measurements, but how do you sort of build that into your workflow? Is there a lot that needs to be done? Like, how do you integrate this as part of your team and everything?
So that's a great question. I don't view it as moving from LabVIEW to TestStand. I view it as moving from your homebrewed test executive to TestStand. You still need LabVIEW in your software stack. When you look at the entire automated test software stack, there's a lot going on. And if you just break it down into simple terms, you have acquire, analyze, and present. Really, if you look at the NI stack around that, the acquisition can be done easily by LabVIEW. I mean, that's what it's built for, is talking to hardware and acquiring and stimulating your device under test, right? And acquiring data from your instrumentation. TestStand is really your analysis piece of that, where it's sequencing it. It's high level executive, where it's basically your what they call their process models in TestStand, where it's telling you how to get that data and putting all of those data sets together essentially, and then pushing it out to like a database like System Link or your reports, and that's your present piece. And so it's really understanding the right tools for the right job and how they fit in that software stack. And once you can convince people of that, and that and that what a life of maintaining your own test executive looks like, and they don't want that life, then you can really get them to buy into that. And that's been how I've been able to do it in the past. So
Yeah, that's a great point that you make there, Sam. You didn't really put a name to it, but I'm gonna bring it up. I know we'd get there, but LabVIEW Plus addresses all those issues, right? And LabVIEW Plus is NI's new suite of software that they're offering as a bundle at a nice price as well. But it contains what I call the big three plus some more. LabVIEW, TestStand, DIAdem, right? Those were what I call the big three, because you have your test development, your acquisition side with LabVIEW, then you have your sequencing via TestStand, and then finally you have your high level analysis and reporting. And that pretty much covers customers with the majority of the capabilities they need to be successful on a basic level.
I think that's really important, Mark, because these customers that we're referring to, let's not lose sight of the fact that these people are domain experts in some other area. They're RF engineers, they're semicon testers, and by using these tools, we're kind of enabling them to create multi-threaded test sequences, control instruments, without having to kind of pivot their entire careers to suddenly become a computer scientist. We're actually, it's quite incredible, really, when you think I'm a physicist. That's my background, and suddenly I can write professional software, having not had a formal computer science background. Sure, there's been training, there's been hard-fought experience over those years, but I still think that's a remarkable achievement, really.
Yeah, 100%. I think the ability to spend less time developing the actual test sequencer and the tests that they really want to focus on is something that's really powerful with both LabVIEW and TestStand. So I fully agree with that.
So David, there's actually two other nuggets that ship with the LabVIEW Plus Studio.
Yep.
There's Instrument Studio, which is I look at that as kind of your soft front panels for the instrumentation that you need, and to help you debug and really dive down into issues, with Instrument Studio. And then there's FlexLogger, which can help get customers up and running really quickly with simple data acquisition stuff. So those are great tools that ship with that as well, that customers should understand how and when to use those tools, right? So that's important.
Do you want to tell us how and when?
Well, I look at FlexLogger as like, if you just have like very low skill set and you just want to you just want to collect data and store it really quickly, then FlexLogger is great for that, right? It takes almost no skill set whatsoever to get moving with that. And then I look at Instrument Studio as kind of the soft front panels for a lot of the NI instrumentation. And the ability to, I know they're adding a lot of what was measurement link capabilities into there, which can give end users a lot of power as well in terms of distributing measurements. But Instrument Studio is really that debug tool, especially for like verification labs, of like, hey, I've got these instruments, how do I interact with them? And how do I grab data off of them and do different things with them? So that's how I view it anyways.
Yeah, no, and it's a good view. Yeah. No, for sure. FlexLogger is, something that's super easy to use. When I was trying to use it, it's like very easy to actually just jump in, try and fail and like figure it out and get a measurement within a few minutes. Similar like front panel to LabVIEW. So if you're familiar with that, pretty easy to jump onto with things like that. So I think it's super great. And then Instrument Studio, as you're saying, great for troubleshooting, great for setting up your instruments. So that all makes sense. I know, Mark, you mentioned DIAdem a little bit. Could you tell us, I think I've seen you recently post about, showing DIAdem to a few engineers. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with, showing that to engineers and what
Yeah,
it's like and what they get out of it?
That was from early January. I taught DIAdem for Emerson here in the Twin Cities, and we had a full class of engineers, 12 people, learning DIAdem, and we went through the course, and they learned a lot, asked some great questions, but along the way, we had a lot of discussions about exactly what they needed to do, and a lot of these discussions happen in between the presentation of the actual course materials, on breaks or lunch or whatever. And they were just describing their workflows, and they started to put together how DIAdem would support that. And in that particular engagement, they decided to add on an extra day after the training was done to basically have me on hand to kind of do a kind of a mini consultation type thing. But during that third day, I was actually able to help 3 different teams to overcome real problems that they were facing back at work. I actually developed a custom data plugin that enabled them to pull in their legacy test data files into DIAdem, and they were super happy about that. So it was definitely a good way to get them solidified that they made the right choice in using DIAdem for their uses, and definitely provided some added value with that extra day of kind of consulting on the end. But DIAdem is very powerful. If you've never looked into it, I would definitely recommend you do. Again, you will need training to learn to use it correctly, because it has a lot of functionality in it that people need to understand. And that was the great thing about going through the course, is the more topics we covered, the more I saw lights go on for these students as they realized that, man, this is, fairly easy to do what I need to do now that I know what that looks like in the DIAdem environment, and they've got their hands on it. They've done it in the class one time, and then they can go back to their desk at lunch and implement something. They would come back and say, yeah, over lunch, I set this up real quick to see a proof of concept on my work. And so there was a lot of progress made in that class, and I attribute that to the power of DIAdem itself.
David, you made a great point I just want to touch on. A few minutes ago, you mentioned when is the right time. And I think that that's something that is often overlooked. I often see TestStand, and I know I'm picking on TestStand a little bit here, but I often see TestStand used quite late in projects where customers have started to develop LabVIEW code around instruments, LabVIEW code around their device under test, and then they say, okay, now I'm ready for a test sequencer. And actually, I view it as a very different way. I almost see it as a prototyping tool, because it can be very useful to actually create your test procedure, your test sequence. And if you haven't got the instruments yet, you can actually add a code module, a step that will pop up a dialog and ask the user to read something from a manual DMM or something like that. What that actually enables you to do is very early in the process, define what is the correct test procedure, but even better, it allows you to produce a test report. One of the things I see, and I'm sure Sam and Mark will have comments on this, but customers, when they get their hands on the test report far too late in the development process, and then they say, well, would it be nice to see the data presented slightly differently, or could it be graphed or whatever? If you can actually give them that test report, how it's going to look, before even the instruments have arrived on site, before those deliveries have happened, but you could actually manually run your test process. You can get the report into the hands of the customer, and you can also refine the test procedure itself. So I think understanding when and where these tools, maybe there's a slight break to what might be deemed as conventional, and we could start using these tools earlier in the process.
Yeah, Chris, you've actually touched on something that's been really a real struggle here at TestDirect is we'll get close to the end of a project and we'll present that report to the customer, and then they're like, oh no, just like you said, we want it this way, or can you add this data or that? And so we're kind of flipping our development process to actually generating mock reports early on in the almost during the architecture phase, and handing those mock reports to the customer and saying, is this what you expect? Because then we can work back from there and say, okay, now how do we get that data in the way that you really want it? And it's we've only done it on a few early projects right now, and what we're seeing is that we have spent a lot less time in integration period because of that. So I'm excited to see what else it's going to do for us. So good point.
That's great points about using this software in kind of the prototype phase of things.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way, Chris, especially as you mentioned about it, thinking of it like as a prototyping software. Definitely being able to, you know, think about what you want and what you're going to get in the end, and then making sure that you're able to get it. Even if you just do tests and everything, I think is something that's obviously super important. So that makes a lot of sense.
Everybody's talking about shifting left, right? That's the phrase of the moment right now. So if we can produce the reports earlier, if we can actually debug our test procedure in terms of its execution flow, that's got to be a good thing, right?
Definitely. I think it's also, I think one of the things that is nice when I try using, you know, like simulated hardware in LabVIEW even, it's like, I know this data is not going to necessarily be right, but the program that I'm building and the results that I want to see are able, or something that's good about prototyping in LabVIEW, you know, you're able to build something pretty quickly, test it out, and then, you know, is this what I want? Is this not what I want? I don't know. Let's see. Let's try. So it's something that's really great for that as well.
David, you actually touched on something right there.
Yeah.
I can say something about that real quick. So yeah, I think one of the problems is because LabVIEW is so easy to prototype with, like you can slap something together that's a prototype really, really quickly, in like minutes or hours. And the problem is we don't have the engineering discipline to go back then later and really really re-architect it and do it properly so that it is, you know, it meets all of those check boxes like flexibility, scalability, you know, modular and all of that. And sometimes that starts to grow into spaghetti code, or what I call Frankenstein code, where you're just band-aiding things over time, and that becomes your main application. I think my advice to people who are learning LabVIEW or doing LabVIEW for the first time would be, hey, be careful with your prototypes. That should not turn into your end solution. Have the discipline to go back and fix that technical debt as early as possible. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's the advice I always give people.
Or even better, Sam, VI Analyzer is a great tool for actually looking at your code and identifying, you know, did you get into some bad habits with when you were throwing down that code quickly to prototype? Have some of those things crept through into your everyday programming? Have you got some dangerous constructs there on your block diagrams that need addressing? So there are tools, right, to help us with that. But you're absolutely right. I think the speed of which you can actually have something up and running, it also requires that discipline that you talked about.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've kind of touched on this a little bit throughout the conversation is, you know, a lot of planning and thinking through what we're going to do, you know, even though we may try prototyping to see something to see how it works, we should have an overall plan to make sure that we're going to be doing our things efficiently. I guess one thing that I'd like to ask is, you know, along this, as we try planning and thinking about our projects, you know, we sometimes start off with, you know, a simple measurement, but then, you know, we need to start sequencing, and then, or we need to add some data analysis and reporting. I guess, what's your best way to kind of take a look at the project and try thinking about, everything that you need, or deciding if you just want to use LabVIEW, or if you need TestStand, or if you need DIAdem. I know it may be hard to think about, and we don't have like a project necessarily we're looking at. It's kind of in the abstract right now, but thinking about the needs and what you'd use. What advice would you have for customers who don't necessarily know, oh, should I use TestStand? Should I not use TestStand? When should I use DIAdem, or something like that?
I would say the key thing is what you said several times is planning, right? And as part of planning comes education. So a lot of customers just are not aware of the features that NI software has to offer, and therefore they can't make the best decision. So as integrators and partner companies, we need to do our part to educate these customers on what the software can do. So we really need to kind of stretch to try to get to them earlier, right? Chris mentioned moving things left. I think that we as partner companies need to engage these customers earlier to educate them before they've already started trying to build something on their own. We need to make sure that we're helping them pick the right tool and use the tool properly, give them training so they can do that, give them that education so they can have a solid start on the project. And then, they won't need to go back and redo work that they did once they realize they made a poor decision.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the customer too. You have such a wide variety of customers using LabVIEW and TestStand and the NI tool suite. Anywhere from your mom and pop shops, your one-off developer who just kind of goes and does their own thing, to large teams that are doing this, right, and that need to standardize on these tool sets. And I think Mark hit it right on the head. You got to do planning. You got to plan up front. I'm a big advocate of architecting things out ahead of time. It's like trying to build a house without having blueprints. You just start nailing in boards and hope that you make a kitchen and a bathroom and a living room and whatever else. And if you don't have that architecture in place, that plan in place, you're going to end up with the tree house I used to make as a kid with a few nails in it, right? You're not going to end up with this nice mansion that you want, that you can live with. And so it really does depend on the type of customer you want, the type of results you want. Sometimes you're beholden to the standards that your company imposes on you. And I think the architects at those companies need to look at that full tool set, like Mark said, and understand what's really out there and be consistently up to date with what's new in the industry and what's going on with the tools that are available, and making sure that they're staying modern with those tools. That's really important. I think that's an important part of the role of being an architect for these teams, is doing that and then trying to incorporate that back into your tool set. One of those, when I worked at L3 Harris, was NI Package Manager. When that came out, that was just like heaven sent, because we were struggling with deployment. We were struggling with moving the code from one place to another. And when I saw NIPM, I immediately just like latched onto it, went and learned everything I could about it. And I took that back and we started adopting it almost immediately. And it drastically improved, how we deployed our code, and our continuous integration process drastically improved because of that. So just staying up to date with what's out there is huge.
Yeah, as part of the planning process that Mark referred to, don't be afraid to create example user interfaces that don't have any code behind them. Sit with the customer very early on and actually create. We've got a tool that allows us to create user interfaces. They might not be functional. Maybe they have some very basic functionality, but we can show them what the visual appearance is going to look like. When you're working with other developers, we've got a tool in LabVIEW that is great for creating the connector pane, if you will, the API of our code. Again, it doesn't have to be fully implemented, but we can define what are the inputs and outputs of these functions that we're going to be creating. We can actually work on the implementation later, but as part of that planning process, let's define what the inputs and the outputs are going to be for our overall architecture.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, planning always, like, before we're going to get our project started, and then also potentially also, taking a step back as we roll out some of our projects, taking a step back and seeing, I think we talked earlier about, building a test executive, and you kind of glom things on as you go. But if we take a step back every single time, or, few times, just thinking about, well, where am I going? How is this going to look like in the future? I think we'd probably end up with, some better situations, right? So I think something like that could be really important. So thank you. I think something that I want to try, sort of ending on, we talked about a lot of our favorite projects in LabVIEW, something of our proudest accomplishments. What are some of the highlights of y'all's career with LabVIEW and TestStand, or some of your other NI software? What is something that you've seen or really proud to help a customer with?
Do you want me to go first? I'll go first.
Sure.
So for me, I'm living it right now. It's what we're doing at TestStand. We have a very powerful framework built around these tools with the LabVIEW and the TestStand stack and the NIPM stack and SystemLink and all of these tools. And our goal is to walk up to any common test station and within less than an hour have a 60 to 80% solution. And we're doing that through the modularity that these tools provide. And basically, think of it like Lego pieces. You walk up there and you say, I have these instruments. I'm going to grab these pieces, plug them in to the system, and away I go, right? And I have these measurements that I can throw down that I need. And that's really our goal. And so that's kind of, I guess, to answer your question, I'm living the pinnacle of where I am with my tools, and I can't wait to see what else we're going to do with it. As AI comes along, where's that going to take us with these tools? We're investigating that and looking at what that looks like in the future, and how we can apply that to these workflows as well. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited. I don't think I've lived the best yet, I guess is what I'm saying. It's to come, but I'm definitely at the top of my game now. So.
Well, that's good. Mark, Chris, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, for me, my proudest accomplishment is just helping other people learn about the power of LabVIEW graphical programming and other NI software and hardware tools. And most years I trained between 200 and 400 students for NI. And additional to that, I also go into schools from elementary to college level to talk about LabVIEW, what the tool is, how it can be used, show them some cool applications of the software, let them get their hands on it as well. And that's going to serve the purpose of inspiring these students to pursue education and careers in STEM fields. So that's what I'm looking for is, the future. We need to have more LabVIEW developers in the pipeline so that when we decide to retire, there's people to take our places in the future.
I think my proudest moment is actually I've been working with one of our consulting customers at Conrad Technologies, and we started working with them about 5 years ago. And at the time, they were I'm going to say at a novice to intermediate level. They were really just beginning their LabVIEW TestStand journey. But they really wanted to start as they meant to go on by doing things correctly, following what you might term best practice. So we looked at their entire development process, things like the use of coding standards, implementation of VI analyzer tests so that they would be producing high quality LabVIEW code using sequence analyzer with TestStand. So they would be producing high quality TestStand sequences as well. They also went through the education path, as Mark has spoke a lot about. They took the NI training courses with certified professional instructors, and then ultimately actually became certified themselves to architect level in both LabVIEW and in TestStand, which I think is just an incredible achievement. And yeah, absolutely made me proud to have been with them on that journey.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. It's really great to hear the great things that you all have been able to do and help customers with. It's really exciting. I think, you know, Mark specifically, you mentioned, you know, it's great when you can see someone succeed and really help them get towards that, Chris as well, and Sam as well. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us on this like great conversation. You know, we've been talking about LabVIEW and how to do even more with other NI software. Throughout this conversation, we talked a lot at the beginning, you know, we talked about LabVIEW and how its graphical programming has really helped you all develop faster and easier. It's a more intuitive approach to programming, program like you think. It kind of helps you follow that data like flow, even when you're debugging. It really makes things a little bit more straightforward. So that's really helpful. As we talked about, you know, looking at other NI software, and sometimes when projects potentially become a little bit bigger than we expect, you know, it's really important to plan things out and spend our time thinking about where we're going, what we're developing, and where we're headed. You know, sometimes we talk about, you know, sequencing a few measurements in LabVIEW, and that may seem like a simple task, but as we talked about, it can really become a lot. We try building things, adding new features like reporting, parallelism. Sometimes engineers leave the company, and it kind of leaves the team, you know, a little bit stranded. What do I do? Where do I go? Do I try rebuilding this? How do I bother maintaining this? How would I do something? So, you know, trying to come up with a plan, choosing a more maintainable solution like TestStand, looking at solutions like DIAdem for data analysis, try building things out is really important. Another really important topic that we talked about too is training. So making sure that you're spending the time to learn some of these tools is really important. You're going to get a lot more out of them, and it's going to be a lot easier once you have training. I think both Sam and Mark, you talked about having light bulb moments, and Chris, I believe too, having light bulb moments when you're talking with students. They really see like, oh, like this is how I could do this, or this is all the things that I'd be able to do. And not necessarily that the tool is, you know, innately complex or all these tasks are crazy to accomplish, but they're simple once you learn how to do it the right way. So spending the time to learn is really important. Thank you so much, Chris, Mark, and Sam. Is there anything that you all want to share where people can find you? Mark?
My company is Radius Technologies LLC. So the website is radius-tek.com. And I do consulting and also training, custom training as well. And I just want to say thanks for having me today, and looking forward to the future of LabVIEW.
Sam?
Yeah, so tesseract.com, you can go there. It's a play on Tesseract, which is like a 4-dimensional cube. If you're not familiar with Marvel, that's also one of the things that they're after in that movie. But yeah, we provide integrated solutions, as well as we have a pretty powerful framework that helps teams standardize on how to do things with the NI tool stack. And so yeah, reach out if you need help. I think, you know, parting words is like we're in a unique niche with test and measurement, and it's fun to be a part of this community. And I think just helping each other out and really just growing each other is a huge part of it, and just being together, and we have to do that, because like somebody mentioned earlier, we're not gonna have the resources that we have pretty soon. And so we need to either create more resources or get much faster and more efficient at what we do. And I think it's exciting to see where this industry is going. So
Thanks, David, and thanks for having me. So if you want to reach out, conrad-technologies.com. I can be contacted there directly. If you want to talk about your test and measurement requirements, automation and control, or even software best practice and how we can help your team implement excellence.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.